Welcome and everyone, and welcome to this show. And today, our special guest from Australia, Dr. Joyce Varoman, and a brilliant mind who blends academic rigor with clinical compassion. She is a senior psychologist, a PhD in psychology, and coach and a writer with international experience from institutions like Oxford University in UK, New York University in USA, and Queensland Brain Institute in Australia. And Joyce is currently based in Brisbane, Australia, and working with Queensland Health while running her private practice supporting neurodivergent women. Those navigating autism, ADHD, eating disorders, and burnout. So her work, featured in Psychology Today and backed by science, helps individuals shift from overwhelm to clarity and from self-doubt to self-authorship. So today, she will walk us through her incredible journey from the research labs of Oxford to frontline psychology practice and how she transforming lives one story at a time. So let's welcome our respectable guest, Dr. Joyce. Thank you very much for joining, Joyce. And Joyce, your journey spans research, clinical work, and coaching. What was the turning point that made you shift from pure academia to applied psychology and coaching?
Yeah, thank you so much for that very kind introduction, Dr. Habib. I really appreciate it. And thank you for having me on today. I really appreciate the opportunity to have a chat with you. I guess I think there were kind of three defining kind of moments for me in that shift from research to clinical practice. And I think the first really important kind of moment for me, or important period for me, was that time that I spent at the Nuffel Department of Clinical Neurosciences at the University of Oxford. So I was working with Professor Sanjay Manohar there, and also with his kind of previous supervisor, Dr. Masood Hussain. And they both are cognitive neuroscientists, so really kind of, quite basic researchers. But at the same time, they work as neurologists as well within the NHS. And I found that very inspiring to kind of see how they ran their labs, how they incorporated research with clinical practice, even though they weren't psychologists, but working in a different kind of discipline. I really appreciated that integration of research with really trying to assist people and help people when they encounter certain difficulties in their life, as we all do. So that was really one defining kind of period or point. I guess another thing that kind of made me reflect on, do I want to stay in research or do I want to potentially move into clinical practice, was when my kids were born. So I have twin daughters and they were born during my PhD, which I mainly completed in Brisbane in Australia at the University of Queensland. And that was a very challenging period for me. Of course, very lovely to add additional people to the family, but I think integrating that with kind of early career academia and being a PhD student at that time, and I guess the system, at least in Australia, it's a bit different in the Netherlands, where I'm originally from. I'm not sure how it's in the UK, but I think Australia is a bit similar to the US in the sense that you're a student when you're doing your PhD. You're not an employee. You don't necessarily have access to a lot of supports. There aren't a lot of policies and procedures in place when you become a parent during that time. And I think that kind of, yeah, that difficult period stayed with me for quite a long time as a kind of an unpleasant memory that nobody really kind of individually was responsible for, but just kind of the system didn't really fit with what I needed at that point in time. And I guess in clinical practice, having still having kids at home, there is more flexibility. I guess there is a bit less intense competition as well. So you're a bit more free to go into a direction and give that form and shape in a way that kind of suits you for your personal life as well as your interests. And then I guess the final thing, very briefly, is that I originally started studying back in the day my undergraduate degree in psychology with the idea that I would go into clinical practice and that I would, yeah, kind of actively contribute to helping people who might be kind of struggling or at a difficult point in their lives. And so I thought maybe I go back to my roots for at least a while and work in clinical practice.
That's inspiring. That's inspiring, Joyce. Really wonderful and inspiration for the audience as well. And what are the biggest misconceptions people have about neurodivergent women, especially in professional environment?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think there's still quite many kind of misconceptions out there for all genders, but I think it's even more strongly so for women because I guess a lot of the I guess, kind of more stereotypical kind of things we think of when we think of neurodivergence. A lot of that research is actually based on men and boys in particular, and you can see some real gender differences there. So some things that we see with neurodivergent women in the work environment is often that they can struggle quite a bit with executive functioning and with kind of organization. So they can be often feeling quite overwhelmed, often feeling like they're kind of putting fires out all the time, but not really getting on top of their workload. While often, if we put in place some good supports to help them with that, that can improve quite a bit. I guess another thing that pops up quite often is in terms of social interactions, and especially when these women kind of get to slightly more senior positions where they might be supervising others. They might often be perceived, especially if they fall somewhere on the autism spectrum, as perhaps being, I don't know, not warm enough or kind of being too direct, something that we often kind of find more acceptable in men. But when a woman is quite direct, that can sometimes in certain workplaces be more difficult.
Yeah, yes, that's good. That's good. And also, in your private practice, for example, what strategies do you find most helpful in helping the neurodivergent women manage burnout and sensory overwhelm, something like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. Um, Look, I think one general thing that often find very helpful in working with neurodivergent women in my private practice is actually validating that, look, even though you don't kind of show necessarily those stereotypical behaviors or cognitions, you really do meet criteria for a neurodiversity kind of diagnosis, whichever diagnosis that might be, whether that's autism or ADHD or maybe dyslexia, dysgraphia, something like that. And I guess linking that to some of the difficulties that these women have consistently and repeatedly experienced throughout their life and throughout their careers, and really kind of unpacking with them that, for example, their struggles with managing their workload are really not due to them being lazy or them not being smart enough or them not being talented enough, but that it's really just because their brain functions in a slightly different way that requires then some different approaches. So, as a strategy, I think self compassion often is quite powerful, and then I guess kind of the more practical strategies as well, kind of that people often already try themselves, like putting lots of alarms on your phone if you might score higher on that ADHD dimension, right? Especially maybe inattentive ADHD. Just having those external reminders of, look, now it's time to leave for work. Now it's time to, I don't know, get up, time to eat breakfast, those kind of things.
So, Joyce, another question from your conversation: How you
Mhm.
check that this patient is something burned out or overwhelmed, sensory overwhelmed or something. So what are the procedures you are adopting to go in depth and to highlight this person has this specific problem?
Yeah, that's an excellent question as well. And look, I think in that domain as a profession, I think we can still improve a lot in how we measure and assess, first of all, neurodiversity, but also how we measure and assess and evaluate then those things that flow out from it, like burnout, exhaustion, overwhelm, etc. I guess my general approach, in line with best practice, kind of evidence based guidelines, is to use multiple types of input, right? So, one important type of input is, of course, talking to the person who is sitting in front of you, right? And asking them, so, how are you experiencing your daily life? How are you experiencing your work life, your home life? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Are you feeling burned out? And then, if kind of from those conversations, it pops up that yes, people might potentially kind of struggle in those areas, I would generally be looking for a questionnaire that kind of also assesses them in that domain, whether that's mood or overwhelm, burnout, so that we can kind of quantify that a little bit as well and compare them to other people, right, of a similar population. How do they score on, say, burnout, for example? Is it indeed also significantly higher than other people of their age, their gender, etc. And often what we see is that those things align quite well. So kind of the report that people give you often aligns really quite well with the questionnaire data, maybe some collateral data we might sometimes collect from a significant other, like a parent or a
Mm.
partner or an adult child or a friend.
Yes, that's wonderful. Yes, yes, that's good. Yeah, questionnairing and not only relying on the patient, but also from the parents or something wonderful. And Joyce, another thing, how do you bridge your scientific background with your coaching? How do you
Yeah.
ensure that your sport remains research informed and
Mhm.
still human centered?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think it's always a bit of a balancing act, right? To balance those two things. I think there are a couple of things that I do actively. I think I try to keep up with the research literature, especially within my field. So, especially within the area of neurodiversity, I try to kind of stay across kind of major research articles that are published, try to, or definitely stay across as well, international guidelines for best evidence based practice as well. They're great resources. Another thing that I do is I'm still affiliated with the University of Queensland and supervise psychology master's students there. So through their research work, I can kind of stay up to date as well, and through providing them with guidance. Um, I think in working with people directly, I think my first kind of
Yes.
approach is always to connect with them. And my first approach is always building up that working relationship, allowing them to tell a bit of their story, right? And um, yeah, be empathetic towards their strengths as well as their challenges. And I think as a second step, then once that kind of that working relationship has been built a bit, and often that has to happen really quickly, then I think that evidence-based practice can come in, and people then are more open to hearing, look, this might be kind of how we can work on this, or how research can support you in those, say, challenges with overwhelm or something that you might be experiencing.
Wonderful, wonderful. Getting stories from the people, getting connected, and also get in connection with the university. Wonderful to balance this research informed and human centered approach. And what advice, Joyce, you would give to the young psychologists or mental
Mhm.
health professionals who want to build a career around neurodiversity advocacy?
Yeah, yeah. Um, Look, I think a couple of things again, maybe again, kind of 3 points I think that I would want to highlight. Um, I think one thing is that I think it's really worthwhile as a student or as an early career psychologist or researcher, if you have an interest in clinical practice as well as research, think
Yeah.
about combining the two. I think it really allows you to provide the best care to your clients, right? Because you stay on top of recent developments, etc. It's really rewarding as well to be able to provide that best practice care. So even though I think in the UK at the moment, for example, I think there are some challenges about around kind of combining research and clinical work just because of the sheer kind of ethics requirements and those kind of things. But I think it's still really worth it and really a worthwhile cause. Um, I think also, I think there is still so much work to be done in neurodiversity, but also in clinical practice in general, as well as in kind of the academic world, right? So I think if you're like, yeah, your listeners undoubtedly are like compassionate people, intelligent people, motivated people, right? We can use them so much, and there's still so much work and so much progress that kind of needs to be done in mental health. For example, when we think about it in terms of stigma around mental health conditions, even though depression and anxiety in many kind of communities are becoming a bit more normalized, there's still so many mental health conditions that are still very strongly stigmatized, and where we really need compassionate people who can help support people who are affected by those conditions, but also normalize them and kind of show that this can happen to any one of us.
Yeah.
And I think finally, maybe kind of, I think especially kind of if people belong to, say, a marginalized group in academia or in clinical practice, whether that's in terms of gender, race, caring status, whatever that might be, right? I think it's important for people that they kind of keep in mind that along their career path, whatever that chosen path might be, that they probably will encounter a lot of struggles, and more struggles than maybe some other people, right? And I think it's important to maybe highlight, even though they might know that already, that that doesn't reflect on them, right? There are a lot of systems, whether that are academic systems, whether they are clinical systems, mental health related systems, that are not, they're not kind of equally designed, right? So I think for people, kind of especially students or early career people who belong to kind of minority groups, etc., to keep in mind that that they are good enough, right? They're good enough to make it, and even though they might encounter more challenges, don't give up, right? You can get there, even if it might take longer because of certain things you might encounter. You can make a significant contribution to psychology, to academia, whatever your chosen field is.
That's great. Linking academia with the clinical practice, that's good. And another question comes in mind that Joyce, how can you provide some tools for the patients who are feeling overwhelmed or something like that, burnout,
Mhm.
something? Those patients, can you provide some advice to them as well that they can check themselves that okay, these are the main questionnaire. Definitely, there is a detailed questionnaire there, but these are the main things you have to check, and you fall in this category, and then you have to go ahead with this to have the advice from the psychologist or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to think about as well. I think especially given that when we look at the statistics worldwide, we see that a lot of people who might experience overwhelm, burnout, or other kind of mental health conditions, they're not at the moment necessarily receiving supports, right? Or not the right support. So I think, yeah, that's a really good question. Um, I think it's always important to kind of maybe pause for a moment, right? And really reflect on, if I look at myself at the moment, how am I doing at this point in time or for the last couple of days or last couple of weeks compared to my baseline, right? Am I maybe feeling more stressed, more anxious, more overwhelmed than usual? And importantly, how is that impacting on my daily functioning? Right? It's very normal to have ups and downs and to feel more stressed at some points than at others. And that's not necessarily kind of a negative thing. But if it really starts to impact how we function in daily life, and if we notice like we might be sleeping longer, or we might not be able to sleep at all, or we might not be eating kind of as we usually would, or not spending time with friends or family, then maybe it's time to think about what are those things that we could do, right? What are some action steps that we can take? And I think there are a couple of things kind of in terms of steps that we could take then, right? I think one thing that research shows is very helpful is to open up to certain trusted others, right? So maybe a certain friend or a certain family member, we could confide in them and kind of share a bit about how we're feeling. Alternatively, we could visit in Australia, they call it your general practitioner, might be your family doctor. I don't know how you
Yes, yes,
call it in
family
the
doctor.
UK, family doctor. So that's a good kind of point as well to touch base with and just say, look, maybe I have been a bit more stressed and a bit more flat, a bit more burned out lately. What would you recommend in my local area? Some other good resources are also potentially kind of online resources, right? So things like certain Beyond Blue, for example, as a website, or some other websites that kind of resonate with you. In more recent years, people also actually often can find community on social media as well. So you might kind of follow some, I don't know, some YouTubers or some TikTokers or Instagrammers who are also kind of talking about similar topics, and that might give you some more ideas.
That's great. That's great. Wonderful. Joining the community as well. And
Yeah.
Joyce, last question:
Mhm.
what has been your most rewarding moment so far in this journey from Oxford
Mhm.
to Brisbane and everything in between? Something.
Mhm. Oh, that's a great question. Oh, I need to reflect on that for a minute. There have been many great moments along the way, I have to say. Um, I think can I cheat and say two things?
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure, sure.
Thank you for being so flexible. I think one thing is it's not really a moment, but it's a general kind of thing. I think the support that I've received from all kinds of different people along the way in my journey. So different supervisors, different colleagues, friends, family, etc. That has really been invaluable, and I'm really grateful for that. I think in terms of moments, I think I'm probably most grateful for the current kind of period. Actually, I feel like I have made that transition from research to clinical practice, and I feel very comfortable in clinical practice now. Initially, you take a bit of a step back when you make a change because you have to acquire a lot of skills and a lot of experience again. And I feel I'm now at a stage where I have acquired a lot of that experience and a lot of those skills in clinical practice, and that is running really well, I feel. And so I feel like I can take on some research responsibilities again, like working with university master students, for example, which then allows me to kind of integrate clinical practice with research a bit more. And yeah, I think I'm really, yeah, really grateful, really happy about how that's going at the moment.
That's great. Great. Stepping back to for the big transformation. That's really nice wording from you. And thank you very much, Dr. Joyce. Really nice to have you in this session. And I wish you continued success in Brisbane,
Thank
online, and everywhere your work touches life. Thank you once again for your passionate and motivated journey. And I think so. It's a really nice journey, inspiring for the audience, and really thankful to have this nice. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been
Thank you.
wonderful to talk to you, and thanks for having me.
Thank you.